The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat in a plastic chair that had seen too many conversations like this one, clutching my phone with both hands as my mother's voice cut through the sterile air like a scalpel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah, we need $50,000 by Friday, she said, not looking at me, her eyes fixed on the beige wall where a motivational poster about healing hung crooked. Your father's surgery can't wait any longer, and insurance is only covering 60%. The number hit me like a physical blow. 50,000. I had exactly 52,000 in my savings account, money I'd scraped together over 4 years of working double shifts at the diner, tutoring kids after school, and selling plasma twice a week. Money that was supposed to be my ticket out, my chance at something more than the small town of Millbrook, Ohio, where dreams went to die slow, quiet deaths. Mom, that's everything I have, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of fluorescent lights. She finally turned to look at me, her expression a mixture of desperation and something else, something that looked almost like entitlement. He's your father, Sarah. Family comes first. You've always been the responsible one. The responsible one. Those 3 words had followed me around like a shadow for 22 years, wrapping around my shoulders like a heavy coat I never asked to wear. While my brother Jake spent his weekends at parties and his summers traveling with friends, I was the one checking on Dad's blood pressure medication, balancing Mom's checkbook, and making sure the bills got paid on time. I stared at the worn linoleum beneath my feet, each scuff mark telling a story of someone else's crisis, someone else's impossible choice. What about Jake? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Can't he help? My mother's laugh was sharp and bitter. Jake's getting married in 3 months, Sarah. You know we've already committed to helping with the wedding. The venue alone cost us $30,000, and that was your college fund we'd been saving. There it was. The casual mention of my college fund. 15 years of birthday money, Christmas gifts, and summer job savings that my parents had promised to match, now transformed into white roses and a 7-course dinner for people who probably wouldn't remember Jake's wife's name in 5 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake, who had partied his way through community college and dropped out after 2 semesters, was getting a fairy tale wedding funded by money that was supposed to buy my education. Meanwhile, I was being asked to empty my own carefully hoarded savings to keep our father alive. Sarah, are you listening? Mom's voice pulled me back to the present. The doctor said Dad's condition is deteriorating. We can't wait for insurance appeals or payment plans. It has to be now. I looked down the hallway toward the cardiac unit where my father lay connected to machines that beeped out the rhythm of his failing heart. Robert Mitchell had worked construction for 30 years, his hands growing more calloused and his back more bent with each passing season. He'd missed exactly 3 days of work in my entire childhood. Once when I was born, once when Jake broke his arm falling off his bike, and once when his own father died. He wasn't a perfect man. He drank too much beer on Sundays, fell asleep in his recliner watching football, and had never once told me he was proud of me, not even when I graduated valedictorian, or when I got into state university with a partial scholarship. But he was my father, and the thought of losing him because I was too selfish to give up my dreams made my stomach twist into knots. How long do I have to decide? I asked, though part of me already knew I'd made the choice the moment I walked into this sterile maze of corridors and false hope. The surgery is scheduled for Monday morning, Mom said. They need a deposit by Friday afternoon, or they'll have to postpone indefinitely. Friday. 3 days to decide between my father's life and my own future. 3 days to choose between being the daughter who saved her dad and the woman who saved herself. I thought about my acceptance letter to State University, still pinned to the corkboard above my desk at home. I thought about Professor Martinez, who had encouraged me to apply for the pre-med program, who had seen something in me that I was only beginning to see in myself. I thought about the apartment I'd found near campus, small and drafty but mine, where I could study without Jake's music blaring through thin walls, or Mom asking me to run to the grocery store every time I opened a textbook. I need some air, I said, standing up so quickly that the plastic chair squeaked against the floor. Sarah, wait! But I was already walking away. my sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum as I navigated toward the exit. The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing me into the muggy Ohio evening where the air tasted like freedom and impending rain. I sat on a concrete bench in the hospital's front garden, surrounded by carefully maintained flowers that looked too perfect to be real. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate-to-be, Jessica, asking if I'd gotten my student ID photo taken yet. The normalcy of it, worrying about photo IDs and dorm room decorating, felt like a message from another universe. 22 years old, and I'd never lived anywhere but my childhood bedroom with its pink walls and participation trophy collection. I'd never stayed up all night talking about philosophy with strangers who might become best friends. I'd never had to choose my own groceries or figure out how to do laundry without my mother hovering nearby with fabric softener and unsolicited advice. But I'd also never had to watch my father struggle to breathe, his face gray and drawn with pain that medication couldn't quite touch. I'd never had to see my mother cry real tears, not the dramatic ones she saved for fights with Dad, but the quiet, desperate ones that leaked out when she thought no one was looking. A young couple walked past me toward the parking garage, holding hands and whispering to each other in the way that suggested they were sharing good news. The woman was probably my age, maybe younger, wearing scrubs with cartoon characters that marked her as a pediatric nurse. She looked tired but content, like someone who had found her place in the world. I wondered what it felt like to have a job that mattered, to go home every day knowing you'd made a difference in someone's life. At the diner, my biggest achievement was remembering which customers wanted their eggs over easy, and which ones would complain if their coffee wasn't hot enough to melt steel. My phone rang, jarring me out of my thoughts. Jake's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won, and I answered on the fourth ring. "Hey sis," his voice was cheerful, oblivious. "Mom told me about Dad. Scary stuff, right? But don't worry, I'm sure everything will work out." "Jake, where are you?" I could hear music in the background, laughter that sounded like it was soaked in alcohol and carefree youth. "Bachelor party prep," he said. "Tommy's cousin has this lake house, and we're planning the whole weekend. It's going to be epic." Epic. My father was dying, my future was dissolving, and my brother was planning an epic weekend at a lake house. The disconnect was so complete it felt almost surreal. "Did Mom tell you about the money?" I asked. "Yeah, that sucks," he said, and I could practically hear him shrugging through the phone. "But you've always been good with money, Sarah Bear. You'll figure something out." Sarah Bear. He hadn't called me that since we were kids, when I would let him climb into my bed during thunderstorms and would share my Halloween candy even though he'd already eaten all of his own. Back when I thought being a big sister meant protecting him from everything, including the consequences of his own choices. "Jake, this is my college money. Everything I've saved." "I know, and that's really generous of you," he said, misunderstanding completely. "Dad's lucky to have a daughter like you. Hey, I gotta go. We're about to start the poker game. But seriously, thanks for handling this. You're the best." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in the gathering darkness. Handling this. As if my father's life-or-death surgery was just another problem that reliable Sarah could solve, with enough organization and self-sacrifice. I looked back at the hospital, its windows glowing like eyes in the night, each one representing someone's crisis, someone's impossible choice. In a few hours, I would have to go home and pretend to sleep while my mind churned through scenarios and calculations, weighing my father's life against my own dreams on scales that would never balance. But sitting there in the garden, surrounded by flowers that bloomed because someone tended them faithfully, I felt something shift inside me. A small crack in the foundation of assumptions I'd built my life on. For the first time, I began to wonder what would happen if I said no. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive home from the hospital took 15 minutes, but I stretched it to 40 by taking every back road I could remember from high school. Past the abandoned grain elevator where kids used to spray paint their initials. Past the Stewart farm where I'd picked strawberries for pocket money when I was 12. Past the old railroad crossing where trains hadn't run for 20 years, but the warning bells still hung like broken promises against the sky. Millbrook at night looked like a town that time forgot, Streetlights casting yellow pools on empty sidewalks, porch lights glowing behind curtains that hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, where your mistakes followed you like stray dogs, and where leaving was considered both a betrayal and an impossibility. I pulled into our driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house I'd grown up in. The porch light was on, and I could see my mother moving around the kitchen, probably stress cleaning the way she always did when life got complicated. The house looked smaller than it had when I was a kid, like it had shrunk along with my dreams of escaping it. Inside, Mom was attacking the countertops with bleach and fury, scrubbing invisible stains while tears streaked down her cheeks. She looked up when I walked in, hope and desperation warring in her eyes. "Did you think about what we discussed?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "I'm still thinking," I said, which was both true and a lie. I was thinking, but not about giving them the money. I was thinking about Professor Martinez's words when she'd handed me the pre-med program application. "Sarah, you have a gift for seeing patterns, for understanding how systems work. Don't waste that in a place that's too small for your mind." Mom's shoulders sagged. "Your father asked about you. He wanted to know if you were okay." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. Even lying in a hospital bed with a failing heart, he was worried about me. That was Dad. Never good with words, but always carrying everyone else's burdens like they were his own. "How is he?" I asked, settling into one of the kitchen chairs that had been there since I was in elementary school. "Scared," Mom said simply. "The doctors say if we wait much longer, the damage could be irreversible. They're talking about him being on disability permanently, maybe needing a heart transplant down the line." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the image of my father. Robert Mitchell, who could fix anything with duct tape and determination, reduced to a patient number on a chart. "What about getting a loan?" I asked. "The house has equity, right?" "We already refinanced twice to pay for Jake's community college and to cover the roof repair after that storm 3 years ago," Mom said. "The bank won't approve us for another mortgage. Your father's been out of work for 6 weeks already, and his disability payments haven't started yet." "What about Jake's wedding fund? That $30,000 could—" "Absolutely not." Mom's voice turned sharp. "The deposits are non-refundable, and Madison's parents are flying in from California. We can't embarrass Jake like that." "Embarrass Jake?" I almost laughed. Apparently, Jake's embarrassment was worth more than my entire future. But my potential embarrassment, dropping out of college, staying trapped in Millbrook forever, didn't register on their concern scale. "Sarah, I know this is a lot to ask," Mom continued, her voice softening. "But you've always been the one we could count on. Remember when you were 16 and used your babysitting money to help us catch up on the electric bill? Or when you gave up your senior trip to save money for Jake's graduation party?" I remembered. I remembered all of it. I remembered being 12 and translating the confusing insurance letters because Mom got overwhelmed by paperwork. I remembered being 15 and working weekends at the hardware store to help pay for groceries when Dad's hours got cut. I remembered being 18 and choosing community college over state university the first time because they needed me to stay home and help. "You've always understood family responsibility," Mom said. "That's what makes you special, honey. You put other people first." Special. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Was that really what made me special? My willingness to sacrifice my own dreams for everyone else's convenience? My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Emily, who had left Millbrook for Northwestern University 3 years ago and never looked back. "Can't wait to see you at orientation next month. I'm so proud of you for finally getting out of there." Finally getting out. Emily was one of the few people who understood what it meant to grow up in a place that felt like quicksand, where every day you didn't leave made leaving the next day a little bit harder. "I need to call Emily back," I said, standing up. "Sarah, wait." Mom grabbed my arm. "I know you think we favor Jake, but that's not true. We're just different with him because he needs more guidance. You've always been self-sufficient." Self-sufficient? Another way of saying, we expect you to handle everything yourself while we focus on your brother. I walked to my bedroom, closing the door behind me and leaning against it like I was barricading myself from the weight of their expectations. My room looked like a museum exhibit. Small-town girl's bedroom, circa 2010. Boy band posters I'd been too lazy to take down. A bookshelf crammed with young adult novels and textbooks. A desk where I'd written hundreds of college application essays that never got sent, because there was always some family crisis that needed my attention more. I called Emily, and she answered on the first ring. "Sarah, perfect timing. I just got off the phone with my advisor about fall classes, and I think you're going to love organic chemistry with Professor Rodriguez. She's tough, but amazing, and—" I interrupted. "I need to tell you something." Something in my voice must have warned her because her tone immediately shifted. "What's wrong?" I told her everything. About Dad's surgery, about the money, about Jake's wedding fund, about the impossible choice I was facing. Emily listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I loved about her. She never jumped in with easy answers or empty reassurances. "So let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "Your parents gave your college fund to Jake for his wedding, and now they want you to empty your savings for your dad's surgery? When you put it like that, it sounds insane, manipulative, completely unfair. He's my father, Emily. I can't just let him die." "No one's asking you to let him die," she said, "but there have to be other options. Medical payment plans, charity programs, GoFundMe campaigns." "Sarah, you've been the family fix-it person for so long that they don't even consider alternatives anymore. They just assume you'll handle it." I sank onto my bed, staring at the acceptance letter from State University that I'd pinned to my bulletin board like a talisman. The letterhead looked official and important, promising a future that felt increasingly like a fantasy. "What if I'm being selfish?" I asked. "What if this is just me being a terrible daughter?" "Sarah, listen to me." Emily's voice was fierce. "I've known you since we were 8 years old. You are the least selfish person I've ever met. You gave up your senior prom to work an extra shift so you could help your family. You took a gap year to help with your grandmother's funeral expenses. You've been putting everyone else's needs first for so long that you don't even recognize what your own needs look like anymore." I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, grateful that she couldn't see me crying. But what if something happens to Dad? What if I could have saved him, and I chose not to? And what if you give up everything and he gets sick again in 5 years? What if Jake needs money for a house down payment next year? What if your mom wants to renovate the kitchen? When does it end, Sarah? When do you get to have a life? I didn't have an answer for that. I'd never thought about when it would end because I'd never imagined it could end. Being the responsible one, the problem solver, the family safety net, that was just who I was, wasn't it? "There's something else," I said. "Jake called me while I was at the hospital. He's at his bachelor party planning weekend, talking about how epic it's going to be. He thanked me for handling this, like Dad's surgery is just another inconvenience for me to manage." Emily was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah, can I ask you something? When was the last time someone in your family asked what you wanted? Not what you were willing to give up or sacrifice, but what you actually wanted for yourself?" I thought about it, really thought about it, scrolling back through years of family conversations and decisions. Birthdays where they asked what kind of cake I wanted to bake for the family dinner. Holidays where they asked which relatives I was willing to pick up from the airport. School events where they asked if I could work an extra shift to help pay for Jake's class ring or letter jacket. "I can't remember," I said finally. "That's not normal, Sarah. Families are supposed to support each other, not designate one person as the permanent martyr." After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my childhood bedroom, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me, Mom doing dishes in the kitchen, the neighbor's dog barking at shadows, the distant hum of traffic on Highway 23, carrying people to places I'd never been. I pulled out my laptop and started researching medical payment plans, hospital charity programs, state assistance funds. Within an hour, I'd found 6 different resources that my parents hadn't mentioned. Programs specifically designed to help families navigate medical crises without destroying their financial futures. I also found something else, a scholarship program for first-generation college students facing family emergencies. The Rebecca Martinez Memorial Scholarship provided up to $50,000 for students whose educational plans were threatened by family medical costs. The application deadline was next Friday. Rebecca Martinez, the same last name as Professor Martinez. I clicked through to the Scholarship Foundation's board of directors, and there she was. Dr. Elena Martinez, professor of biology, State University. The scholarship had been established in memory of her daughter, a pre-med student who had died in a car accident while rushing home to help with a family crisis. The scholarship description felt like it had been written specifically for me, to support students who have demonstrated exceptional academic achievement and family dedication, but who should not have to choose between their educational dreams and their family responsibilities. I stared at the application, my heart pounding with something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, practical hope, backed by action steps and deadlines instead of vague wishes and someday dreams. For the first time since walking into that hospital waiting room, I felt like there might be a path forward that didn't require me to sacrifice my soul for my family's approval. I opened a new document and began typing my application essay, the words flowing like they'd been waiting inside me for years, ready to finally be heard. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made everything in Millbrook look like it was viewed through dirty glass. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., my mind spinning through scenarios and possibilities like a broken record player stuck on the same song. The scholarship application sat completed on my laptop, ready to submit, but I hadn't worked up the courage to hit send yet. I arrived at the diner for my opening shift, keys jingling as I unlocked the door to Maggie's Place, the restaurant where I'd worked every summer since I was 16 and full-time since graduating high school. The familiar smell of coffee grounds and bacon grease usually comforted me, but today it felt suffocating, like breathing through a wet towel. Maggie herself was already there, prepping vegetables in the kitchen despite being 72 and theoretically retired. She looked up when I walked in, her sharp blue eyes taking in my appearance, with the kind of assessment that came from 40 years of reading customers' moods. "You look like hell, kiddo," she said without preamble. "Want to talk about it, or should I just keep my mouth shut and let you work through whatever's eating you?" Maggie Henderson had owned the diner for longer than I'd been alive, and in all that time she'd never once sugarcoated anything. She was the kind of woman who could make you feel completely understood with a look, and completely exposed with a question. Most people in town were either a little afraid of her or completely devoted to her. I fell into the second category. "Family stuff," I said, tying my apron around my waist with more force than necessary. "The kind of family stuff where they want something from you that you don't want to give?" she asked, not looking up from her chopping. I paused in the middle of counting register cash. "How did you—" "Sarah, honey, I've been watching you carry other people's burdens since you were barely tall enough to see over the counter. And lately, you've been walking around like someone who's been asked to carry one burden too many." The morning rush started before I could respond, a steady stream of construction workers, teachers, and retirees who wanted their eggs over easy and their coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I fell into the familiar rhythm of taking orders, pouring coffee, and making small talk about the weather and the high school football team's chances this season. Mrs. Patterson, my old English teacher, sat at table 6 and ordered her usual wheat toast, black coffee, and a side of fruit. When I brought her order, she caught my wrist gently. "Sarah, dear, I heard about your father. How are you holding up?" News traveled fast in Millbrook, especially bad news. By now, half the town probably knew about Dad's surgery and had their own opinions about what our family should do about it. "We're managing," I said, which was the kind of non-answer that people in small towns perfected by age 12. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said, stirring sugar into her coffee, "I was cleaning out my desk yesterday, and I found that essay you wrote senior year, the one about wanting to study medicine so you could come back and open a clinic here in town." I remembered that essay. I'd written it for her advanced composition class, pouring out dreams I'd barely admitted to myself. The idea of being Dr. Sarah Mitchell, coming home to help people who couldn't afford to drive 2 hours to the nearest specialist. It seemed impossibly naive now. "That was a long time ago," I said. 4 years isn't that long, sweetie, and good dreams don't have expiration dates." She squeezed my hand. "Sometimes they just need different paths than we originally planned." The lunch crowd was lighter, mostly regulars who knew their orders by heart and trusted me to remember how they liked their burgers cooked. Around 2 o'clock, when the restaurant was nearly empty, Jake walked in wearing his work clothes from the auto shop and the kind of grin that usually meant he wanted something. "Hey, Sarah Bear," he said, sliding into a booth like he owned the place. can I get a Coke and some of those curly fries? I poured his drink and put in the order, then sat across from him during what was supposed to be my break. Up close, I could see that his grin was a little forced, and there were worry lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. "Mom says you're thinking about helping with Dad's surgery," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Thinking about it," I confirmed. That's really generous of you, sis. I mean, I know that's your college money and everything." He knew, of course he knew, and yet he was sitting here in his grease-stained coveralls, talking about generosity like I was donating to charity instead of sacrificing my entire future for a family that had never sacrificed anything for me. "Jake," I said carefully, "what if we postponed your wedding, just for a year, until Dad gets better and we figure out the finances?" His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like panic. "We can't do that," he said quickly. "Madison's been planning this for 2 years. Her dress is ordered, the venue is booked, her parents already bought plane tickets. Plus, we've already sent out the invitations. But if it's between Dad's surgery and—" "Sarah, you don't understand. Madison's family, they're not like us. Her dad's a lawyer. Her mom runs some big nonprofit in San Francisco. They already think I'm not good enough for her. If we postpone the wedding because of money problems, they'll probably convince her to call the whole thing off." I stared at my brother, this 25-year-old man who looked like Dad but had never inherited any of his backbone. "So you'd rather our father risk dying than admit to your in-laws that we're not wealthy?" "That's not fair," Jake said, his voice rising enough that Maggie looked over from behind the counter. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Jake? Explain it to me." He ran his hands through his hair, leaving it sticking up at odd angles. "Look, I know this sucks for you. I know you wanted to go to college. But Sarah, you're smart enough to figure something else out. You always are. Maybe you could do online classes or something. But if I lose Madison—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. If he lost Madison, he'd have to face the possibility that he was just Jake Mitchell from Millbrook, Ohio, with a high school diploma and a job at his buddy's auto shop. The wedding wasn't just about love. It was about transformation, about becoming someone different through association. "I've been saving that money for 4 years," I said quietly. "And I've been dating Madison for 3 years," he shot back. "This isn't just about money, Sarah. This is about my whole future." "What about my future?" "You'll figure something out. You always do." There it was again. The assumption that I would figure it out. That I would handle it. That I would sacrifice whatever needed to be sacrificed, so that everyone else could have what they wanted. Maggie appeared at our table with Jake's fries and a look that could have frozen beer. "Everything okay over here?" she asked, but she was looking at Jake like she'd heard enough of our conversation to form some opinions. "Everything's fine," Jake said quickly, grabbing a handful of fries. "Just family stuff." Maggie said, refilling my coffee cup even though it was still half full. "Family stuff can be complicated. Sometimes family means supporting each other. Sometimes it means knowing when to stop enabling bad decisions." Jake looked confused, but I understood exactly what Maggie was saying. She'd been watching our family dynamics play out in her restaurant for years, had seen me pick up checks that Jake walked away from, had witnessed my parents beam with pride when Jake graduated from high school with a 2.1 GPA, while barely acknowledging when I graduated as valedictorian. After Jake left, I found myself alone with Maggie during the dead period between lunch and dinner. She was wiping down tables that were already clean, a nervous habit she'd developed during the pandemic when customers were scarce and bills were high. "You want some advice from an old woman who's made more mistakes than you've had birthdays?" she asked. "I'm not sure I'm ready to hear it," I said honestly. "That's usually when you need to hear it most." She settled into the booth across from me, her arthritic hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "My husband died when I was 35. Heart attack, sudden as a thunderclap, left me with this place, 2 kids, and about $3,000 in debt." I'd never heard this story before. Maggie rarely talked about her personal life, especially about the husband whose picture still hung behind the register. "My family said I should sell the diner, move back home to Kentucky, let my brother take care of us. Said it was too much for a woman alone. They meant well, but they couldn't see that this place wasn't just a business to me. It was my identity, my independence, my way of proving I could handle my own life. Did you ever consider it, moving back? Every day for about 6 months, she said with a dry laugh. But then I realized something. The people who love you don't ask you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. They don't ask you to sacrifice your dreams so they can keep theirs. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Sarah, I've watched you grow up in this place. I've seen you handle drunk customers with more grace than most adults, balance schedules that would break a corporate manager, and care for people who don't always deserve it. You're not responsible for fixing everyone else's problems. But he's my father, I said, the words coming out like a prayer I'd repeated so many times it had lost its meaning. And you're his daughter. But being someone's daughter doesn't mean becoming their solution to every problem. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable people to avoid facing their own responsibilities. I thought about the scholarship application sitting on my laptop, about Professor Martinez, who had seen something in me worth nurturing, about Emily, who had escaped to Northwestern and was building a life that belonged entirely to herself. What if I'm wrong? I asked. What if I choose myself and something terrible happens? What if you don't choose yourself and something terrible happens anyway? Maggie countered. What if you give up everything and your father gets sick again next year? What if Jake needs money for a house down payment? What if your mother decides she wants to renovate the kitchen? Honey, there will always be another crisis, another emergency, another reason why you should sacrifice your dreams for someone else's comfort. That evening, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at my phone screen. The scholarship application was ready to submit, but my finger hovered over the send button like it was connected to an electric fence. Through the hospital windows, I could see the cardiac unit where my father lay connected to machines, probably wondering if his daughter loved him enough to save his life. The weight of that assumption felt heavier than the building itself. But for the first time in my life, I was beginning to wonder if love and sacrifice were really the same thing, or if I'd been confusing them for so long that I'd forgotten the difference. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and made a choice that would change everything. I pressed send. The scholarship application disappeared into the digital ether with a soft whoosh that seemed impossibly quiet for such a monumental moment. My hands were shaking as I set my phone down on the passenger seat, and for a second I wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life or the first truly brave decision I'd ever made. The hospital's automatic doors slid open as I approached, releasing a gust of air that smelled like antiseptic and other people's fears. I'd called ahead and asked to speak with Dad's social worker, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had been mentioned in passing but never consulted about financial options. It was time to have the conversation my family had been avoiding. Patricia met me in the hospital's Family Resource Center, a small room decorated with motivational posters and brochures about everything from grief counseling to meal assistance programs. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of calm competence that made you believe problems could actually be solved. "Sarah, thank you for reaching out," she said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the comfortable chairs arranged around a small table. "I've been hoping to speak with your family about some options we haven't discussed yet." "Options?" I said, feeling a flicker of something that might have been hope. "Your father's case qualifies for several assistance programs," Patricia said, pulling out a folder thick with paperwork. "The hospital has a financial hardship program that can reduce the cost by up to 70% for families who meet certain income requirements. There's also a state fund for emergency cardiac procedures, and I've been in contact with the American Heart Association about their patient assistance grants." I stared at her, my mind trying to process what she was saying. "Are you telling me there's a way to pay for Dad's surgery without my family having to come up with $50,000? "That's exactly what I'm telling you," she said gently. "Between the various programs, your family would be responsible for approximately $8,000, which can be set up on a payment plan as low as $200 a month. $8,000, not $50,000, not my entire life savings, not my college fund or my future or my dreams, wrapped up in a bow and handed over as tribute to family obligation. Why didn't anyone tell us about these programs?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. Patricia's expression grew carefully neutral. I attempted to schedule meetings with your parents twice this week. Both times, I was told that the family preferred to handle the financial arrangements privately. My mother had known about these programs and had chosen not to tell me, had instead sent me straight into an emotional tailspin about choosing between Dad's life and my future. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow, making it hard to breathe. "Can you walk me through the application process?" I asked. For the next hour, Patricia and I went through paperwork that should have been completed days ago. Tax returns, bank statements, proof of income, all information that my parents could have provided easily if they'd been willing to admit we needed help instead of expecting me to be the solution to everything. "I can submit these tonight," Patricia said, organizing the forms into neat stacks. "You should have approval within 48 hours, and we can schedule your father's surgery for early next week." "And the payment plan?" $215 a month for 36 months, she confirmed. "Very manageable for most families." I walked out of that meeting feeling like I'd been living in a house of mirrors, where everything I thought I understood about my situation had been deliberately distorted. My family hadn't needed me to sacrifice my future. They'd needed me to sacrifice my future so they could maintain their pride. The cardiac unit was quiet when I arrived at Dad's room. He was awake, staring at the ceiling with the kind of hollow expression that comes from too many hours of thinking about mortality. When he saw me, his face brightened in a way that made my chest tight. "Sarah, sweetheart," he said, his voice hoarse from the breathing treatments. "Your mother said you might be able to help with the surgery costs." I pulled a chair close to his bed and took his hand, noticing how thin it had gotten, how the wedding ring he'd worn for 27 years now slid loose around his finger. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He nodded, though something wary flickered in his eyes. "Did you know about the hospital's financial assistance programs, the hardship fund, the state emergency grants?" His face went through several expressions before settling on something that looked like shame. "Your mother mentioned something about charity programs," he said quietly. "But Sarah, we're not charity cases. I've worked my whole life, paid my taxes, never asked for a handout from anyone." "It's not charity, Dad. It's assistance for working families who have medical emergencies. It's what those programs are designed for." "I don't want people thinking we can't take care of our own problems," he said, his voice getting stronger with stubbornness I recognized from every argument he'd ever had with Mom. "I don't want my medical bills becoming gossip at the hardware store." I stared at my father, this man who had taught me to change my own oil and balance a checkbook, who had worked construction in 100-degree heat and below freezing cold to provide for his family. And I realized that his pride wasn't about dignity. It was about control. About maintaining the illusion that he was still the provider, still the one who solved problems instead of creating them. "Dad," I said carefully, "would you rather risk dying than admit you need help?" "I'd rather my daughter not have to choose between her future and my life," he said, meeting my eyes for the first time. "But if that's the choice we're facing, then yes, I'd take the charity programs." Something in my chest unclenched for the first time in days. "I already applied for them. We should have approval by tomorrow." His eyes widened. "You did?" "I did. Dad, this was never about choosing between your life and my future. This was about choosing between enabling family pride and finding real solutions." We sat in silence for a while, his hand warm in mine, machines beeping softly around us. Finally, he spoke again. "Your mother's scared," he said. "She doesn't handle uncertainty well, and when she's scared, she gets controlling, looking for someone to fix things. And I'm the someone who fixes things." "You've always been good at it," he said, "maybe too good. We got used to relying on you for things we should have figured out ourselves." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever gotten from him, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "Dad, can I tell you something? I got into the pre-med program at State University. I'm going to study to become a doctor." His face transformed, pride replacing the worry lines that had been carved there for weeks. "Sarah, that's incredible. When did you find out?" 3 months ago. I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid something like this would happen, that there would be some family crisis that would require me to give it up." He was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation, And now? Now I'm going. I submitted an application for a scholarship today for students whose educational plans are threatened by family medical emergencies. I'm going to become Dr. Sarah Mitchell. And maybe someday I'll come back to Millbrook and open a clinic so families like ours don't have to drive 2 hours to see a specialist. Your mother's not going to like this, he said, but there was something in his voice that sounded almost like admiration. I know, I said, but Mom's opinion isn't going to determine my life anymore. When I left Dad's room, I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks and had finally been given permission to set it down. But I knew the hardest conversation was still waiting for me. I found Mom in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a salad that looked like it had been assembled by someone who'd only heard vegetables described secondhand. She looked up when I sat down across from her, hope and desperation still warring in her expression. "Did you talk to your father about the money?" she asked. "I talked to him about the financial assistance programs that you chose not to tell me about," I said, keeping my voice level. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Sarah, those programs are for people who really need them." "We really need them, Mom." "Dad's been out of work for 6 weeks. You're part-time at the school district. Jake makes barely above minimum wage. We qualify for assistance, and there's nothing shameful about accepting help when you need it." "I don't want the whole town knowing our business," she said, setting down her fork. "The whole town already knows Dad's in the hospital. The difference is whether they know we handled it responsibly, or whether they know we asked one family member to bankrupt herself for everyone else's pride." Mom's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Sarah. Your father's illness, Jake's wedding, trying to keep everything together." "Jake's wedding can wait," I said firmly. "Or Jake and Madison can have a smaller wedding. Or they can take out a loan. But I'm not paying for Dad's surgery with my college fund." "Sarah, you're being selfish." The word hung between us like a thrown gauntlet. Selfish. The accusation I'd been dreading. The one that was supposed to make me crumble and apologize and hand over my bank account information like a good, obedient daughter. Instead, I found myself smiling. "You know what, Mom? Maybe I am being selfish. Maybe wanting an education is selfish. Maybe refusing to sacrifice my future for everyone else's convenience is selfish. But if that's selfish, then I guess I'm okay with being selfish." I stood up, leaving my untouched coffee growing cold on the table. "The social worker says Dad's surgery can be scheduled for Monday morning. The hospital programs will cover everything except about $8,000, which can be paid over 3 years. You and Dad can handle that without anyone's college fund or life savings." "Sarah, wait." But I was already walking away, my footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway as I headed toward the exit and whatever came next. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely right. The notification came at 6:47 a.m. on Friday morning, jolting me awake with the sharp ping of an email arriving on my phone. For a moment, I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the crack in the ceiling that looked like a lightning bolt, trying to remember why my heart was already racing before I was fully conscious. Then I remembered. The scholarship application, the fight with Mom, Dad's surgery scheduled for Monday, Jake's wedding in 8 weeks. The entire foundation of my family's expectations crumbling like a house built on sand. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and opened the email from the Rebecca Martinez Memorial Scholarship Foundation. The subject line read, "Congratulations, Scholarship Award Notification." My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the phone. "Dear Ms. Mitchell," the email began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the Rebecca Martinez Memorial Scholarship in the amount of $50,000. Your essay demonstrated exactly the kind of resilience, academic excellence, and complex family dynamics that this scholarship was designed to address. $50,000. Full tuition for 4 years. Plus enough left over for books, housing, and the kind of breathing room that would let me focus on studying instead of constantly calculating whether I could afford both groceries and gas." I read the email 3 times before the words fully sank in. At the bottom was a personal note from Professor Martinez. "Sarah, your essay moved me to tears. My daughter Rebecca would have loved your perspective on balancing family loyalty with personal dreams. I look forward to working with you in the fall. You have a bright future ahead of you. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake, and realized I was crying. Not the frustrated, angry tears I'd been shedding all week, but something cleaner and brighter. Tears of relief, of possibility, of doors opening instead of slamming shut. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. How did the scholarship application go? I've been thinking about you all night. Instead of texting back, I called her, not caring that it was barely 7 a.m. Sarah? Emily's voice was thick with sleep, but immediately alert. What's wrong? I got it, I said, my voice breaking. Emily, I got the scholarship, $50,000. Oh my God, Sarah, oh my God! Emily's shriek was loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I'm so proud of you! I knew you could do it! Tell me everything! I told her about the application, about discovering the financial assistance programs, about confronting my parents, and walking away from the hospital cafeteria with my dignity intact for the first time in years. So your dad's surgery is covered, and you have your college funding? Emily said. Sarah, you literally solved everyone's problems without sacrificing yourself. You're like a miracle worker. It doesn't feel like a miracle, I said, looking around my childhood bedroom with new eyes. It feels like I finally stopped accepting that other people's problems were automatically mine to solve. That's exactly what it is, Emily said. So what happens now? When do you move to campus? Orientation is in 3 weeks, I said, and saying it out loud made it feel real in a way it hadn't before. I need to register for classes, figure out housing, buy textbooks, and tell your family, Emily added quietly. That was the part I'd been avoiding thinking about. The scholarship changed everything, but it didn't change the fact that my family had been willing to sacrifice my future for their convenience. It didn't erase the fact that my mother had hidden information that could have solved our problems without anyone giving up their dreams. They're going to be angry, I said. Let them be angry, Emily replied. Sarah, you've spent your whole life managing other people's emotions. Maybe it's time to let them figure out how to manage their own. After we hung up, I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the house waking up. Mom moving around in the kitchen, probably starting coffee and planning her day around Dad's treatment schedule. The shower running, which meant Jake was getting ready for work at the auto shop. Normal sounds from a family that was about to discover that their designated problem solver had found a way to solve her own problems instead. I got dressed and went downstairs, finding Mom at the kitchen table with her laptop open and papers spread everywhere. She looked up when I entered, and I could see she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, and there was a crumpled tissue beside her coffee mug. Sarah, honey, I'm so glad you're up, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I was thinking about what you said yesterday, and maybe we can work something out. What if we ask Jake to postpone the wedding for just 6 months, just until your father's back on his feet? I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her, studying her face. She looked smaller somehow, like the fight had gone out of her overnight. Mom, I have something to tell you, I said. Dad's surgery is completely covered. I spoke with the social worker yesterday, and between the hospital's hardship program and the state assistance fund, you'll only owe about $8,000 total, which works out to around $200 a month for 3 years. Relief flooded her features so quickly it was almost comical. Really? Are you sure? I'm sure. I filled out all the paperwork yesterday. Dad's surgery is scheduled for Monday morning, and you don't need my college fund or anyone else's money to pay for it. She pressed her hands to her chest like she was having trouble breathing. Oh, thank God. Sarah, why didn't you tell me about these programs earlier? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications we both understood. I could have let it go, could have pretended we'd discovered the programs together, could have maintained the family fiction that we were all just doing our best in a difficult situation. Instead, I said, Mom, the social worker told me she tried to set up meetings with you twice this week to discuss financial options. She said you told her the family preferred to handle things privately. Mom's face went through several expressions. Surprise, embarrassment, and finally something that looked like defeat. I thought if we could handle it ourselves, it would be better. I didn't want to go through all that paperwork, all those invasive questions about our finances. So instead you decided to ask me to give up my entire future. I thought you'd understand, she said quietly. You've always been the one who puts family first. No, Mom, I've always been the one you've asked to put family first. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee like it might contain answers to questions she was afraid to ask. I have something else to tell you, I said. I applied for a scholarship for students whose educational plans are threatened by family medical emergencies. I found out this morning that I received it, $50,000 for college. Mom's head snapped up. You applied for a scholarship without telling us? I applied for a scholarship because I wasn't willing to give up my education, and I knew you'd try to talk me out of it if I told you. Sarah, that's wonderful, she said, though her voice sounded strained. I'm proud of you for being so resourceful. But I could see the calculation in her eyes, the wheels turning as she processed what this meant. If I had scholarship money, then maybe I could still help with wedding costs or home repairs, or whatever the next family crisis turned out to be. The money is specifically for education, I said, cutting off that line of thinking. Tuition, books, housing. It can't be used for anything else, and I wouldn't use it for anything else even if I could. Of course not, she said quickly. I wouldn't expect you to. But we both knew she was already expecting exactly that. Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair still damp from his shower, car keys jingling in his hand. Morning, ladies. Sarah, Mom told me you figured out the money situation for Dad's surgery. That's awesome. The hospital figured it out, I corrected. Through their assistance programs. Even better, Jake said, grabbing a banana from the counter. So everything worked out perfectly. Dad gets his surgery, I get my wedding, and you get to keep your college money. Win-win-win. I stared at my brother, marveling at his ability to reframe the situation so that everyone was a winner and no one had to examine their own behavior or motivations. Jake, do you understand what happened here? I asked. Do you understand that Mom knew about financial assistance programs but chose not to use them because she was embarrassed? Do you understand that she was willing to let me sacrifice my entire future rather than fill out some paperwork? Jake shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he hadn't walked into this conversation. Look, Sarah, I'm just glad everything worked out. Why do we have to analyze it to death? Because if we don't analyze it, it's going to happen again, I said. The next time there's a family crisis, you'll all assume I'll handle it. The next time someone needs money, you'll assume I'll provide it. The next time there's a problem, you'll assume I'll sacrifice whatever I need to sacrifice to fix it. That's not true, Mom protested. Isn't it? I challenged. When was the last time you asked Jake to give up something important for the family? When was the last time you expected him to be the responsible one? Jake's face flushed red. That's not fair, Sarah. I help out plenty. You help out when it's convenient, I said. When it doesn't cost you anything that matters to you. But when push comes to shove, when someone actually has to sacrifice something significant, it's always me. Because you're better at handling things, Mom said weakly. No, I said, standing up and rinsed my coffee mug in the sink. Because you've trained me to believe that my dreams matter less than everyone else's comfort. I turned to face them both, these people I loved who had shaped me into someone who didn't know how to put herself first. I'm going to college in 3 weeks, I said. I'm going to study pre-med, and I'm going to become a doctor. And I'm not going to be available to fix everyone's problems anymore. You're going to have to figure out how to handle your own crises, make your own difficult decisions, and solve your own problems. Sarah, you're talking like you're never coming home, Mom said, tears starting to well up in her eyes. I'm coming home, I said gently. But I'm coming home as someone who has her own life, her own priorities, her own dreams. Not as someone whose only purpose is to make everyone else's lives easier. I headed toward the stairs, pausing at the doorway to look back at them. Dad's surgery is Monday morning. The financial assistance is approved. You don't need me for anything except to be your daughter and to visit when I can. And that's gonna have to be enough. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I could hear them talking in low, urgent voices, trying to figure out what had just happened and what it meant for their carefully constructed family dynamic. But for the first time in my life, their conversation wasn't my problem to solve. 3 weeks later, I stood in the parking lot of State University with 2 suitcases, a plastic tub full of bedding, and a heart that felt like it might burst from a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The campus stretched out before me like a small city, red brick buildings and tree-lined walkways buzzing with students hauling furniture and parents taking commemorative photos. Dad's surgery had gone perfectly. The doctor said his recovery was ahead of schedule, and he'd be cleared to return to light construction work within 6 weeks. The family had adjusted to the monthly payment plan without anyone having to sacrifice their future, and life in Millbrook had settled back into its familiar rhythm. Except for me. I was about to step into a life that belonged entirely to myself for the first time in 22 years. "Sarah Mitchell?" A cheerful voice called out behind me. I turned to see a young woman with purple-streaked hair and paint-stained fingers approaching with a clipboard. "I'm Amanda Rodriguez, your orientation leader. Ready to start your adventure?" Adventure. The word sent a thrill through me that I tried to suppress. Good daughters from Millbrook didn't have adventures. They had responsibilities. But I wasn't just a good daughter anymore. The next few hours passed in a blur of dormitory check-ins, meal plan explanations, and campus tours. My roommate turned out to be a pre-engineering student from Detroit named Maria Santos, who had covered her half of the room with blueprints and family photos, showing what looked like 3 generations of women in hard hats. "So what's your story?" Maria asked as we unpacked, her directness refreshing after years of small-town politeness that danced around real questions. I told her about Millbrook, about the diner, about Dad's surgery, and the scholarship that had made everything possible. She listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions that showed she was really paying attention. "Family guilt is brutal," she said when I finished. "My mom wanted me to stay home and help run the family construction business instead of going to college. Said I was abandoning my responsibilities. But you know what my grandmother told me?" I shook my head. "She said, Mija, the best way to honor your family is to become the woman they raised you to be, not the woman they're afraid to let you become." Maria smiled. "Sounds like you figured that out just in time." That evening, there was a welcome reception for scholarship recipients in the Student Center. I almost didn't go, feeling out of place among students who seemed to navigate social situations with an ease I'd never learned. But Emily had made me promise to push myself out of my comfort zone, so I put on my best dress, the same one I'd worn to Jake's high school graduation, and walked across campus as the sun set behind the library. The reception was held in a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the quad. About 50 students mingled around tables laden with food that looked nothing like the comfort food served at Maggie's place. I grabbed a plate and found a quiet corner where I could observe without having to make small talk. "You must be Sarah Mitchell." I turned to find Professor Martinez approaching with 2 cups of coffee and a warm smile. She was smaller than I'd expected, probably in her 50s, with silver-streaked black hair, and the kind of presence that suggested she was used to being the smartest person in the room. "Professor Martinez," I said, standing up so quickly I nearly knocked over my chair. "Thank you so much for the scholarship. I can't tell you what it means to—" "Please sit," she said, handing me one of the coffee cups. "And call me Elena. I've been looking forward to meeting you since I read your application essay." We sat together on a small couch near the windows, the campus lights twinkling like stars below us. Elena asked about my family, my interests, my plans for medical school. But unlike the conversations I was used to at home, she seemed genuinely interested in my answers, rather than looking for ways to redirect the conversation toward more practical concerns. "Your essay mentioned wanting to open a clinic in your hometown," she said. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in medicine. Understanding that healthcare isn't just about treating diseases, but about serving communities." "I'm not sure it's realistic," I admitted. "Small towns like Millbrook don't usually attract doctors. Most of us end up leaving and never coming back." "My daughter Rebecca used to say that the most powerful thing about leaving a small town isn't that you escape it, but that you get to choose whether and how to return," Elena said softly. She believed that sometimes you have to go away to develop the skills and perspective needed to truly help the place you came from. I thought about Rebecca, the pre-med student who had died in a car accident while rushing home for a family crisis. How different might her story have been if she'd had the support to handle family obligations without sacrificing her own well-being? "I hope I get the chance to find out," I said. Elena smiled. "I think you will, but first, focus on becoming the best student and future doctor you can be." Everything else will follow. As the reception wound down, I found myself walking back to the dormitory with a group of other scholarship recipients. They came from all over the country. A first-generation college student from rural Montana, a young man whose parents had immigrated from Somalia, a woman who had aged out of the foster care system and put herself through community college. All of us carrying stories of overcoming circumstances that could have defined our limitations instead of our possibilities. Back in my dorm room, I sat on my narrow bed and called Dad. He answered on the first ring, sounding stronger than he had in weeks. "Sarah, how's college treating you?" "It's only been one day, Dad, but it's incredible. The campus is beautiful, my roommate is great, and I met with the professor who runs the scholarship program." "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," he said, and I could hear the genuine emotion in his voice. "I know this wasn't easy, with everything that happened." "How are you feeling? How's the recovery going?" "Better every day. The doctor says I should be cleared for work next month. Light duty at first, but still." He paused. "Sarah, I want you to know that your mother and I have been talking about how we've handled things as a family, about the expectations we've put on you." I held my breath, not sure what was coming next. "We realize we've been asking you to carry too much of the burden for too long. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. You deserved better from us." I felt tears prick my eyes. It wasn't a complete apology, and it didn't undo years of imbalanced family dynamics, but it was acknowledgement. It was a start. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot to hear. Your mother wants to talk to you too, but she's still processing everything. Give her time." After we hung up, I called Maggie at the diner. She answered with her usual gruffness, but I could hear the smile in her voice when she recognized mine. "Well, if it isn't the college girl," she said. "How's the ivory tower treating you?" "It's only been one day, but I love it already," I said. "Maggie, I wanted to thank you for the advice, for the perspective, for believing I could do this." "Honey, I didn't do anything except tell you what you already knew deep down. You just needed permission to believe it." "What's happening at the diner? Are you managing okay without me?" Maggie chuckled. "I hired 2 new girls to cover your shifts. Turns out when you pay people properly and don't expect them to work miracles for minimum wage, it's not that hard to find good help." Who knew? The gentle dig wasn't lost on me. Maggie had probably been understaffing the diner for years, expecting me to cover the gaps out of loyalty rather than hiring adequate help. "I miss it already," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "The work or the purpose?" Maggie asked shrewdly. I thought about it. The purpose, I guess. Feeling useful, feeling needed. "Sarah, listen to me. There's a difference between being needed and being used. You'll find plenty of ways to be useful in your new life, ways that build you up instead of wearing you down." The next morning I attended my first college class, Introduction to Biology with Dr. Patricia Winters, a woman who looked like she could bench press a car but spoke about cellular respiration with the reverence of a poet discussing sonnets. The classroom was a modern amphitheater with lab stations and equipment I'd only seen in textbooks. "Biology," Dr. Winters said, clicking to a slide showing a human cell in intricate detail, "is the study of life itself. Not just how organisms function, but how they adapt, evolve, and thrive in changing environments." I thought about adaptation and evolution as I took notes, about how organisms that couldn't change died out while those that could transform survived and flourished. Maybe that's what I was doing. Evolving into someone who could thrive in an environment that demanded I put my own growth first. After class, I walked across campus to the financial aid office to sign the final paperwork for my scholarship. The coordinator, a kind woman named Mrs. Chen who reminded me of the hospital social worker, went through each document carefully. "This scholarship is renewable for all 4 years as long as you maintain a 3.5 GPA and continue to demonstrate financial need," she explained. "There's also a summer research component available for recipients who are interested in medical careers." "What kind of research?" I asked. "Community health initiatives, rural medicine programs, that sort of thing, perfect for someone interested in serving underserved populations." I signed my name with a flourish that felt like signing a treaty with my future self. That afternoon, I called Emily to update her on my first day. "So how does it feel?" she asked. "Being a college student instead of the family problem solver?" "Terrifying and amazing," I said honestly. "Like I'm wearing clothes that are the right size for the first time in my life." "And your family? Any guilt trips yet?" Surprisingly, no. Dad actually apologized for putting too much pressure on me over the years. Mom's still processing, but she's not actively trying to sabotage anything. Maybe they're finally realizing that they raised a daughter, not a personal assistant, Emily said. As I sat in my dorm room that evening, surrounded by textbooks and syllabi for classes with names like organic chemistry and human anatomy, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete ownership of my own future. Every choice I made, every grade 1 earned, every opportunity I pursued would be mine alone. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anyone else's dreams on my shoulders. I was finally free to discover how much I could accomplish when my energy was focused on building something instead of constantly fixing what was broken. It felt like the beginning of everything I was meant to become. 6 months into my freshman year, I was hunched over my organic chemistry textbook in the library when my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. I'd learned to let these calls go to voicemail first, a boundary that had taken me weeks to establish and stick to. The old Sarah would have answered immediately, ready to drop everything for whatever crisis needed managing. The voicemail was brief. "Sarah, honey, can you call me back when you get a chance? It's about Jake's wedding. Nothing urgent, just want to talk." Nothing urgent. Those 2 words would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, when every family phone call carried the weight of imminent disaster. I finished the chapter I was reading, something about molecular bonding that felt metaphorically appropriate, before calling her back. "How's school going?" Mom asked when she answered, and I could hear genuine interest in her voice rather than the distracted politeness I'd grown used to. "Really well," I said, settling into one of the library's comfortable reading chairs. "I just finished my midterms. Organic chemistry is kicking my butt, but I think I pulled off a B+ at least." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Your father and I are so proud of how well you're doing." There was something different in her tone, something I couldn't quite identify. Respect, maybe. Or recognition that I was building something significant instead of just fixing other people's problems. "You said you wanted to talk about Jake's wedding?" "Well," Mom said, and I braced myself for whatever request was coming. "Jake and Madison have been talking, and they've decided they want a smaller ceremony. More intimate, they said. They're returning some of the deposits and scaling everything back." I waited for the other shoe to drop, for the part where this somehow became my problem to solve. "That's good," I said cautiously. "It is good," Mom said firmly. "They realized they were planning a wedding for other people instead of for themselves. Madison said she'd rather have something simple and start their marriage without debt hanging over their heads." I nearly dropped my phone. Jake, voluntarily choosing financial responsibility over appearances? Madison, willing to disappoint her parents rather than bankrupt herself for one day? "How are you and Dad feeling about that?" I asked. Honestly, relieved. The stress of trying to keep up with expectations we couldn't really afford was eating us alive. When Jake told us they wanted to scale back, your father actually laughed for the first time in months. I thought about the conversation I'd had with Jake 6 months ago, when he'd been terrified that any deviation from the perfect wedding would cost him Madison. Apparently, he'd learned something about the difference between love and performance. "There's something else," Mom continued. "Jake asked me to tell you that he's sorry for how he acted during your father's medical crisis. He said he's been thinking about it a lot, and he realizes he expected you to sacrifice everything while he protected his own interests." "He could tell me himself," I said, though without the edge that comment would have carried months earlier. "He wanted to, but he wasn't sure you'd want to hear from him. He's been feeling pretty ashamed about the whole thing." I thought about my brother, probably struggling with the realization that his charmed position as the family golden child had come at my expense. It couldn't be easy to acknowledge that your whole life had been subsidized by someone else's sacrifices. "I'll call him," I said. "We should talk." After hanging up with Mom, I sat in the library for a while, processing this unexpected development. Through the tall windows, I could see students hurrying across campus in their winter coats, everyone focused on their own goals and challenges. 6 months ago, I would have felt guilty for not being home to help manage Jake's wedding crisis. Now I felt proud that my family was learning to handle their own decisions without designating someone else as the automatic solution. That evening, I called Jake. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. "Sarah, I was hoping you'd call. Mom said she talked to you about the wedding changes." She did. Sounds like you and Madison made some good decisions. Yeah, we did. His voice was quieter than usual, more thoughtful. Sarah, I owe you an apology, a big one, for the way I acted when Dad was sick, for expecting you to give up your college money while I protected my wedding fund. For basically treating you like you existed to solve everyone else's problems. Jake. No, let me finish. I've been talking to Madison about it, and she helped me see how messed up the whole family dynamic was. How we all just assumed you'd handle whatever crisis came up while everyone else got to keep their dreams intact. I felt something unknot in my chest, a tension I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. I'm glad you're seeing it, I said. But Jake, the important thing is that you don't repeat those patterns going forward. With Madison, with your future kids, with anyone. I won't, he said firmly. Madison and I are planning to go to couples counseling before the wedding. We want to make sure we build something healthy instead of just repeating what we grew up with. After we talked for another hour, the longest real conversation we'd had since we were teenagers, I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. My family was learning to function without me as their designated problem solver, and rather than falling apart, they seemed to be growing stronger. The next few weeks brought new challenges that had nothing to do with family drama. Organic chemistry lived up to its reputation as a pre-med weed-out class, and I found myself spending most of my free time in study groups with other students who were equally determined to prove they belonged in medicine. One of those students was Marcus Washington, a junior from Philadelphia who was retaking the class after struggling with it the first time. He was the kind of person who made everyone around him smarter just by asking the right questions, and he had a way of explaining complex concepts that made them suddenly click into place. The trick with orgo, he told me during one late-night study session, is to stop trying to memorize everything and start understanding the patterns. Molecules want to be stable. Everything they do is about finding stability. We were in the chemistry building's study lounge, surrounded by molecular models and empty coffee cups, working through practice problems that felt like puzzles designed by sadistic geniuses. It was nearly midnight, but neither of us was ready to give up. Kind of like people, I said, looking up from a particularly challenging synthesis problem. What do you mean? People want to be stable too. They'll do whatever it takes to maintain equilibrium, even if the equilibrium is unhealthy. I thought about my family, how they'd organized themselves around the assumption that I would always be available to absorb instability. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is introduce a little chaos into a dysfunctional system. Marcus looked at me with new interest. Speaking from experience? I told him about the medical crisis, about the scholarship, about choosing my own future instead of sacrificing it for family expectations. He listened without judgment, occasionally nodding in recognition. My mom was furious when I decided to retake orgo instead of switching to business, he said when I finished. She thought I was being stubborn, wasting time and money on unrealistic dreams. But sometimes you have to disappoint people in order to become who you're meant to be. How is she about it now? She's starting to come around, especially since I'm actually passing this time, he grinned. Parents have a way of getting on board with your dreams once they see you succeeding at them. The spring semester brought new opportunities. Professor Martinez invited me to join her research lab, where I spent 10 hours a week working on a study about healthcare access in rural communities. The work involved calling clinics in small towns across the Midwest, documenting the challenges they faced in recruiting and retaining medical professionals. What we're finding, Professor Martinez explained during one of our weekly research meetings, is that most rural healthcare shortages aren't just about money. They're about support systems, professional development opportunities, and the feeling that rural medicine is somehow less prestigious than urban specialties. I thought about Dr. Peterson, the family practitioner in Millbrook who had been serving the community for 30 years. He'd gone to medical school at State University, done his residency in Cleveland, and then chosen to return home despite offers from big city hospitals. I'd always assumed he'd settled for less, but maybe he'd chosen more. The chance to know his patients as people, to see the impact of his work on a community he understood intimately. What if we could create a pipeline program, I suggested. Partner with rural high schools to identify students interested in medicine, provide mentorship and support through college and medical school, and then offer incentives for them to return to underserved communities. Professor Martinez looked up from her notes with sharp interest. Tell me more about that idea. By the end of the semester, my pipeline proposal had turned into an independent study project. I was developing a comprehensive plan for rural medical recruitment that could be piloted in communities like Millbrook. The work felt like the perfect intersection of everything I'd learned about medicine, about community, about the importance of having choices instead of just obligations. When I called home to tell my parents about the project, Dad's reaction surprised me. You know, he said, I always wondered why Dr. Peterson came back here after medical school. I figured it was because he couldn't make it in the city. But maybe he saw something in Millbrook that the rest of us take for granted. What do you mean? Well, in the city, you're just another patient. Here, Dr. Peterson knows that my back problems started when I fell off the Henderson roof in '98. He knows your mother gets anxious about medical tests because her father died of a misdiagnosed heart condition. He knows Jake's allergic to penicillin because he treated his strep throat when he was 7. That's exactly what my research is about, I said. The value of that kind of continuity of care and how to make rural medicine attractive to young doctors instead of treating it like a consolation prize. Sounds like you're planning to come home after all, Dad said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Maybe, I said, but if I do, it'll be because I choose to, not because I have to. That night, I sat in my dorm room working on my research proposal while Maria studied for her structural engineering exam. Through our window, I could see the lights of Columbus stretching out toward the horizon, a city full of possibilities I was only beginning to explore. But for the first time since leaving Millbrook, I could also see a path that might eventually lead home, not as the daughter who never got to leave, but as the doctor who chose to return with skills and knowledge that could transform her community. The difference between those two possibilities felt like the difference between surrender and victory, between being trapped and being free to choose your own purpose. I was finally learning that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to accept that your dreams are less important than everyone else's convenience. And sometimes, when you save yourself first, you discover you're actually strong enough to save others too. 4 years later, I stood in the same hospital where Dad had undergone his cardiac surgery, but this time I was wearing a white coat with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, MD, embroidered on the pocket. The medical school graduation ceremony had been 3 weeks earlier, and I was starting my residency in family medicine at Columbus General Hospital, a program specifically designed to train doctors for rural and underserved communities. The hallways looked different now that I understood what happened behind the closed doors. Now that I could read the monitors and interpret the medical abbreviations that had once seemed like a foreign language. But what struck me most was remembering the scared 22-year-old girl who had sat in the waiting room 4 years ago, believing she had to choose between her father's life and her own future. I was here today for a different reason entirely. The Rebecca Martinez Rural Health Initiative, the pipeline program I developed during my undergraduate research, was being launched as a pilot program, and I'd been invited to speak at the kickoff event. 20 high school students from small towns across Ohio were spending the week at the hospital, shadowing doctors, attending lectures, and learning about opportunities in rural medicine. Dr. Mitchell, a nervous voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a teenage girl with paint-stained fingernails and the kind of intensity in her eyes that I recognized from my own mirror years ago. I'm Ashley Turner from Millbrook High School. I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about the program. Millbrook. Of all the schools participating in the pilot program, of course one of the students would be from my hometown. Ashley looked to be about 17, with the self-contained wariness of someone who had learned early not to expect much help from the world. Of course, I said, gesturing toward a quiet seating area near the windows. What would you like to know? Well, Ashley said, settling into her chair like she was afraid it might disappear. I want to be a doctor, but everyone keeps telling me it's not realistic. My guidance counselor says I should focus on more attainable goals, like nursing or medical technology. My parents think medical school is too expensive and takes too long. I studied her face, seeing so much of my younger self in her combination of determination and doubt. What do you want to specialize in? Emergency medicine, she said immediately, then looked embarrassed. I know that's probably aiming too high for someone from Millbrook, but I volunteer with the EMS squad, and I love the adrenaline, the problem solving, the way you have to think fast and make decisions that really matter. That doesn't sound too high to me, I said. It sounds like you know exactly what you want and why you want it. That's further than most people get. Ashley's eyes widened slightly. Really? You don't think I'm being unrealistic? Ashley, can I tell you something? 4 years ago, I was sitting in this exact hospital, convinced that I had to choose between my family's needs and my own dreams. I thought wanting to become a doctor was selfish, that good daughters sacrificed their ambitions for other people's convenience. I told her about the medical crisis, about the scholarship, about the family dynamics that had almost derailed my education before it began. Ashley listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested she understood more than I was saying. So what changed? She asked when I finished. I learned that there's a difference between being responsible and being everyone else's designated problem solver. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to make yourself smaller, so other people can avoid facing their own challenges. But what if my parents can't afford to help with college? What if they need me to work instead? Then you find other ways, I said firmly. Scholarships, grants, work-study programs. You take out loans if you have to. You find mentors who believe in your potential and help you navigate the system. But you don't give up your dreams because other people are afraid of them. Ashley was quiet for a moment, processing this information. The program coordinator said you're planning to open a clinic in Millbrook after your residency. Is that true? It's one possibility I'm exploring, I said. The Rural Health Initiative has funding for new graduates who commit to serving underserved communities for at least 5 years. Millbrook qualifies, and Dr. Peterson is planning to retire soon. Would you really come back? After everything you accomplished, would you choose to live in Millbrook again? It was a question I'd been wrestling with for months. During medical school, I'd had opportunities to pursue competitive residencies in major cities, to specialize in fields that would have taken me as far from Ohio as possible. But the more I learned about medicine, the more I appreciated what Dr. Peterson had been doing all these years, providing comprehensive care to people who might otherwise go without. I'm considering it, I said, but the difference is that if I come back, it'll be because I choose to, not because I never had any other options. And that makes all the difference in the world. That evening, there was a reception for the program participants and their families. I was surprised to see my own parents walk into the hospital conference room, Mom wearing the dress she'd bought for Jake's wedding and Dad in the suit he usually reserved for funerals and job interviews. What are you doing here? I asked, genuinely confused. The program coordinator called and said families were invited to the closing reception, Mom explained. We wanted to see what you've been working on. They'd driven 2 hours to attend a hospital reception for a program I'd developed. 4 years ago, they'd expected me to sacrifice my education for their convenience. Now they were taking time off work to support my professional achievements. We're proud of you, Sarah, Dad said simply, not just for becoming a doctor, but for the way you're using your education to help communities like ours. During the reception, I watched my parents mingle with other families, talking to teenagers from small towns across Ohio who were dreaming of medical careers. Mom ended up in a deep conversation with Ashley Turner's mother about college financing options, sharing information about programs she'd researched online. Your mom's been learning a lot about student aid programs, Dad said, appearing at my elbow with 2 cups of coffee. She feels bad about not knowing these things when you were applying to college. She's learning now, I said. That's what matters. Jake wanted to come tonight, but Madison's due any day now, Dad continued. They're naming the baby Rebecca after your scholarship benefactor. Jake said he wanted his daughter to have a strong name, someone who represented the importance of education and following your dreams. I felt tears prick my eyes. Jake and Madison had been married for 2 years now, and their smaller, more intimate wedding had been exactly what they'd needed. A celebration of their commitment rather than a performance for other people's expectations. Now they were starting their family with intention and responsibility, having learned from the patterns they'd grown up with. How's his job going? I asked. Really well. He's been promoted to shop manager and he's taking business classes at the community college. Says he wants to understand the financial side of running an auto shop, maybe open his own place someday. My brother, taking business classes. voluntarily educating himself instead of expecting someone else to handle the complicated parts of his life. The change was remarkable. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, Professor Martinez found me near the windows overlooking the parking lot where I'd made the decision to apply for her scholarship 4 years earlier. "How does it feel to see the program launching?" she asked. "Surreal," I said honestly. 4 years ago, I was sitting in this hospital thinking my life was over. Now I'm launching a program that might help other students avoid having to make the same impossible choice I thought I was facing. "You know," Elena said thoughtfully, "Rebecca would have loved seeing this. She always believed that the best way to honor difficult experiences was to use them to help other people navigate similar challenges." "I hope the program makes a difference," I said. "It already has. I've been getting calls from rural hospitals across the Midwest asking about replicating the model. And 3 of our current medical students have specifically requested rural medicine rotations because they heard about your work." 6 months later, I was finishing my first year of residency when I got a call from the Millbrook Town Council. Dr. Peterson was ready to retire, and they were officially offering me the opportunity to take over his practice through the Rural Health Initiative. The program would provide funding for equipment upgrades, student loan forgiveness, and a guaranteed salary for 5 years while I established myself in the community. I sat in my small apartment in Columbus, surrounded by medical journals and residency schedules, thinking about the choice in front of me. I could continue my residency in the city, pursue a fellowship in emergency medicine or family medicine research, build a career that would take me anywhere in the country. Or I could go home, not as the girl who never left, but as the doctor who chose to return. I called Emily first. She was finishing her MBA at Northwestern and had just accepted a job with a consulting firm in Chicago. "So you're really considering going back to Millbrook?" she asked. "I think I am," I said. "But Emily, it feels completely different this time. I'm not going back because I have to, or because my family needs me to solve their problems. I'm going back because I have something to offer, and because rural communities need doctors who understand them. That's the difference between being trapped and being free to choose your own purpose," Emily said. "Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you for making the choice from a position of strength instead of obligation." That weekend, I drove to Millbrook for the first time in 6 months. The town looked smaller than I remembered, but also more promising somehow. The main street had a few new businesses, and there was talk of a farmer's market starting up in the town square. Maggie's place was under new management, but still serving coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I stopped by the house to see my parents, who greeted me with the kind of enthusiasm that felt genuine rather than desperate. Mom had turned my old bedroom into a craft room where she was making quilts for the church auction, and Dad was in the garage working on a rocking chair for Jake and Madison's baby. "So," Mom said over dinner, "have you decided about Dr. Peterson's practice?" "I'm leaning toward yes," I said. "But I want to make sure everyone understands that if I come back, I'm coming back as an independent adult with my own life and priorities, not as the family problem solver." "We understand," Dad said firmly. "And honestly, Sarah, we've learned to handle our own problems pretty well over the past few years. We don't need you to take care of us anymore." "We want you to come back because you want to be here," Mom added, "not because you feel obligated." 3 months later, I was back in Millbrook permanently, setting up my medical practice in the clinic that Dr. Peterson had run for 3 decades. The building needed updates, but it had good bones and a location that was accessible to patients throughout the county. On my first day seeing patients, Ashley Turner came in for a sports physical. She'd been accepted to State University with a full scholarship and was planning to major in pre-med. "Dr. Mitchell," she said as I listened to her heart, "I wanted to thank you for what you told me about not making yourself smaller for other people's comfort. It helped me have some difficult conversations with my parents about college." "How did those conversations go?" "Better than I expected. Once they realized I was serious about medical school and had a plan for paying for it, they became really supportive. My mom even started researching medical schools online so she could help me prepare." After Ashley left, I sat in my new office, looking out at the main street of the town where I'd grown up. 4 years earlier, I'd thought leaving Millbrook was the only way to have a meaningful life. Now I understood that the key wasn't about leaving or staying. It was about having the freedom to choose. I'd chosen to come back, but I'd come back on my own terms, with my own resources, and with something valuable to contribute. I wasn't the girl who'd never left. I was the woman who had the confidence to return. And that made all the difference in the world. That evening, I called Professor Martinez to update her on my first day. "How does it feel to be Dr. Mitchell of Millbrook?" she asked. "It feels like coming home," I said, "but to a home I chose rather than one I was trapped in." "Rebecca would have understood that perfectly," Elena said. "She always believed that true freedom isn't about escaping your origins. It's about gaining the power to engage with them on your own terms." As I hung up the phone and looked around my new apartment above the clinic, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete alignment between my values, my choices, and my circumstances. I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do, for reasons that belonged entirely to me. Sometimes, the most revolutionary thing you can do is refuse to accept that your dreams matter less than everyone else's convenience. And sometimes, when you finally save yourself first, you discover you're strong enough to save others too. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.